they were leaders in their community, and they would be kind of helping everyone with anything they needed and preventing any sort of risks in the community. And then for them to be seen in handcuffs, being taken to the station and then being judged and detained, that has a big impact on how they're perceived in the community.
Follow the money.
Two community leaders in Senegal spent years warning their people about the deadly risks of migration. But in 2024, they suddenly found themselves accused of the very thing that they were trying to prevent: human smuggling. Romanian reporter Andrei Popoviciu spent several years working in Senegal, and he found that their story is in fact far from unique, but part of a wider crackdown on migration funded by the EU. I'm your host, Emma, and this is the podcast of the investigative newsroom Follow the Money. Good morning, Andrei. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Your story here starts with the testaments of two friends, Cheikh and Njouda Ndiaye. Could you tell me a little bit about who they are and what exactly happened to them?
Yeah, so the two friends, they're based in a coastal fishing village south of Dakar on the Senegalese southern coast. And they are actually involved in the local community. They are very active in trying to prevent people and explain to people the risks of migration to Europe. But what happens to them is that one day the gendarmerie comes and it arrests them in front of the community, and they were being accused of migrant smuggling. So for them, this comes as a surprise because they have been doing the exact opposite, knowing what everyone is doing, what their plans are. They told me that at one point they saw a horse carriage with a lot of gas tanks, which they reported because that was a sign um, of someone preparing a large amount of petrol or gas being taken from one point to the other. Meant that there's a possibility that a boat might be leaving because you need a lot of gas, right, to do the whole trajectory from Senegal to the Canary Islands. So things like this, whenever they notice something in the community, they flagged it to the police, and they tried to work with the community and be close to them to understand exactly what was happening, who was planning what, and kind of what are the concerns of people there. So for them, being arrested and being accused of the exact same thing that they were trying to prevent came as a shock. And more than that, it really affected their standing in the community because they were seen as leaders in the community. They were helping people, but they were also working with the police and the wider community to try to prevent these types of deaths. They are accused of migrant smuggling, and they are being detained.
And when you say they were accused of migrant smuggling, what exactly were they being accused of?
So they were accused of organizing a boat to go to the Canary Islands, which is the closest EU territory to Senegal by sea. They were accused of organizing that boat, so really finding the engine, finding the people, and kind of contributing to this group of people trying to get to Europe. And what happened was that they were taken to Dakar, where the special court meant to investigate migrant smuggling was starting to have hearings with them. And in that time, they were being detained. It was 2 months and a half of being detained, and with no charges really, because the evidence that should be should prove that they were indeed doing this, organizing this boat, wasn't there really. And their lawyers really worked hard to prove to the court that this wasn't happening. And then they were released in the end, but not after being detained for 2 months and a half.
And did they recognize any of the claims that were being made against them? Did they have any idea how they ended up being in this situation?
They said that because migration is so popular and things happen, it happens so often, that they believe that because of their activities, someone called in on them and made a fake kind of claim to the police that they were indeed involved in this. But Investigators looked through their phones. They spoke with people in the community, and in the end, they didn't manage to find much. So the accusations were baseless in the end, and their lawyer shared with me the exact defense and showed that they were actually not involved in this.
And I think what your story also really shows is that their story is not unique, but is in fact part of a wider crackdown on migration. What exactly is this crackdown all about?
So the EU has developed this strategy in which it's decided that by funding third countries, in this case in West Africa, North Africa, so funding their police forces, funding their judiciary, and also detention centers, administrative detention centers, where people who were intercepted on a boat trying to get to Europe would be unloaded on the shore and then be kept there for a few days. And the EU claims, and the Senegalese government claims, it's to provide them with medical and psychological support, and then kind of track down the smugglers amongst them, or use the people, the candidates to migration, to track down whether the smugglers are in the country or outside or were on the boat. So this money is kind of bolstering these police forces to better intercept, prosecute. A lot of the money goes to training in the judiciary. So how can judges and prosecutors better kind of prosecute these types of crimes?
And through temporarily holding people that have attempted to migrate to Europe in those detention centers, the aim is to sort of get to the smugglers behind these networks through the migrants themselves.
Completely, yeah. The issue is that we've seen this type of detention center play out before. I've worked a lot on Mauritania, where kind of Mauritania uses the same kind of tactic. It has detention centers, but what Mauritania does, and what we've exposed, was that it would arbitrarily arrest people on the streets who they thought didn't have papers or who didn't have papers on them, and they would detain them in these detention centers and then expose them to the border. And often it would be desert areas where people would be left with no food or water, and they would just be kind of arbitrarily and illegally expelled from the country. So from the example of Mauritania, we it is not hard to believe that these detention centers in Senegal might end up being used for the same purpose.
But so, how is it possible that these funds that are intended to actually fight the smugglers themselves end up prosecuting innocent people?
The issue is that because migration is such a hot topic, both in the EU and Senegal, and because people want to do something about like decreasing the number of people that go to Europe, um, I think prosecutors, from what I spoke to lawyers and prosecutors, they and judges, they want to do something about it, and dismantling the migrant smuggling networks, which are very complex, transnational. They involve different countries, and it involves financial investigative methods to be able to track them down. It's very hard to break them apart, whilst looking at the people that are actually helping in any way this migratory route is kind of the easier and more direct way to, first of all, to show that whatever you do, whatever kind of act you might do to help or bolster someone's chances of taking a boat will be punished.
What sort of things should I be thinking about when you say people that help the trajectory to Europe?
This can be anywhere from anything from a mother helping her child, feeding her children before taking a trip, a father knowing that their children will be taking the trip and not doing anything to stop it. But it can also be commerciants, like someone selling gas, for example, and selling an amount of gas that prosecutors can decide, yes, this is too much, you should have thought that this would be used for boats, for example, or selling an engine, or selling a boat, a new boat for the trip. So it has ended up in a place where anyone doing any sort of kind of act of solidarity or a favor, even to a friend, or any type of help, could be considered migrant smuggling. People are are staying in prolonged detention because of these accusations. Then this can be anywhere from like a couple of weeks to a couple of months, 3, 4, 5 months. I've seen cases. So this is basically kind of staying in prison for so long with no charges and then being released has a huge impact on their economic life, on their social life, and on their psychological state even.
And when you say a far reaching impact on their social life and their economic life, what should I imagine?
So I think, especially like the Senegalese society is kind of very close knit. So, if you're being accused or seen as like someone who's like facilitated migration, or that can have big impacts in your community. Like it was the case for the two friends story that I documented. They were leaders in their community, and they would be kind of helping everyone with anything they needed and preventing any sort of risks in the community. And then for them to be seen in handcuffs, being taken to the station and then being judged and detained, that has a big impact on how they're perceived in the community. And beyond that, you have the economical side of the issue. These people will put their jobs on hold. Some people have animals, some people do fishing, and they have little businesses. So these businesses will be put on hold or will fall on their family members and put additional pressure in the society and their close ones while they're being detained.
So basically, that's the result of a system where there is an extremely far reaching responsibility put on anyone somehow related to migration. How is it possible that it works like this?
So um, Senegal uses a law that's agreed upon experts and including by the EU and the government itself, that is outdated. It's a 2005 smuggling and trafficking law, and the most important issue with it is that it does not make a distinction between a migrant as a victim and a migrant as a criminal. Under international norms, migration should not be criminalized. Someone taking this journey is actually a victim of kind of a system and of smugglers, and they should not be either put in jail or sanctioned for attempting to make the trip. The way it should be seen is more like a public health issue, but that law doesn't make the difference between the two. This allows a lot of discretionary power to the judges and to the people working in the legal system. It can be very arbitrary in how a prosecutor or a judge perceives someone to have helped or not. Whether you knowing that your children or your siblings or your friends will be leaving, and you offering them some help before, whether that makes you criminally liable, and that means that some end up being accused. I've seen court cases as early as the 2020s, 2022 and 3, with people accused of migrating as a crime. So it ends up being molded by the politics of the time and of the kind of emotion of the time, of how many deaths have been happening recently from migration. I worked with a source who has helped me understand very well how the statistics behind the convictions in Senegal. And you could see an uptick in convictions and at least in charges when there would be a lot of deaths the period before. So that would push a lot of the judicial authorities to actually take stricter measures, because just recently before there's been too many deaths.
Yeah, so basically, what you also see in perhaps from those statistics is that this is also a little bit about at least showing that they're really doing something to prevent this.
Completely, exactly. And this comes with some sort of benefits as well, because a lot of the money to fight against illegal migration comes from the EU in Senegal. The most recent deal was 30 million euros in September 2024. Um, and if you show you're doing stuff and you're doing more, and you kind of have the numbers to back that up, that money could, extend, and more of it could come.
Essentially, this perverse incentive of look, we're doing something. It's a good idea to give us more money.
It's working, yeah. So we can see how this funding and how this training and the equipment that's being given for migration management purposes, time and time again, I've seen how this funding is actually impacting human rights in a negative way. It actually creates the conditions for people to leave. A lot of the funding from the EU, for example, this unit that was supposed to like be stationed at the border and prevent uh, kind of terrorism issues there. When you take that and you're suppressing protesters in big cities who are unsatisfied with their governments, you're actually frustrating them and giving them extra reasons of anger towards their country and government to leave. A lot of people has said like I had no indication, like I don't have no thought of leaving, but then when I saw the way that police would be treating me, that really kind of pushed me to leave this place and leave this country, because I realized that my my worth and my human dignity is not being respected. I've seen that kind of this police violence that was EU funded was actually pushing people to migrate again, and whether it's worth sacrificing the EU values that the EU kind of pretends to care about uh, for this scope is also a question that should be asked. Whether, yeah, this is indeed the way to do it.
And of course, when we talk about migration and we talk about Senegal in the European political debate, it is indeed often about simply preventing migration. But I'm wondering, when you were reporting in Senegal, when you were living there, how did you experience how this issue lives among the community there?
So migration is, yeah, definitely a huge topic amongst the Senegalese society. It's, as I said, it's a national tragedy for many, and this goes from kind of people, citizens on the streets, all the way to courts, all the way to the government. Everyone sees this as a tragedy because a lot of these people are young men who die before they ever had the chance to even try living in Senegal. Some of them are minors, but a lot of them are 19, 20, 21. This age. Senegal has a very kind of young population as well, and there's a lot of most of it, over 50% of its population is under 25. So I think for them it's like the future of a country that's kind of being wasted. So it's like a very strong feeling.
And did you also speak to a lot of people when you were in Senegal that had family members that left or that wanted to leave?
Everyone has a family member or knows someone who has either tried to or has left. And I think um, there's a quiet kind of pain and trauma of the people who are left behind as well. So the mothers, the women, the wives, but also the siblings and the people who are left behind, who, you know, often put their whole savings and their whole money, which is quite expensive, to try and make this trip work for their siblings. And if they fail, or worse, they die, it has huge impacts on the people left behind. And if they fail, they go back in their communities and they're considered as failures, and they've wasted their family's money and they've wasted this opportunity. They see it as like something that should be stopped. But at the same time, if the opportunities are not there, these people are not leaving because they want adventure. You know, they have a good reason to leave. So it's very complicated and emotional kind of issue for everyone, and everyone left behind.
And you've mentioned a couple of times it's a very, well, of course, an emotional issue. There's a lot of trauma there. What was it like for you as a reporter to engage with these type of stories? Was it also hard to find people that want to talk about it? What was it like?
So I think there are people who want to talk about it because it's so widespread and this happens so much. It's hard to approach interviews, and it's hard to approach people on this topic because, again, it's very traumatic. You're making people relive a lot of the kind of some of the worst moments of their lives, where, well, they were capsizing, or they were lost at sea, or they were being beaten, detained, uh, um, deported, and so on. So we're dealing with a lot of like very heavy kind of experiences these people have been going through.
Has there been any reaction from the European Commission to your story and to similar stories that have been done on this topic?
So I think the EU's position, when time and time again, whenever I reported these types of stories, is always to not take responsibility for the funding they've been investing. They say that all the funding goes through checks and human rights impact assessments and all of that, but I haven't seen any of those. The issue is that the EU often pretends to not know what happens with the money, even though they do know. And we've shown
Mm.
in reports and in the parliament, we've had evidence that the commission and people within the EU institutions know that this money is misused often, or they're being used for human rights violations. The EU has shifted their view, and they look at it as like a security issue rather than a demographic issue, like a normal thing. People have migrated for centuries and thousands of years. This is not a new thing. The framing of it as a security issue, so the focus on police forces, the focus on uh, stopping from the origin countries, and working so much with kind of punitive measures, is shows that the EU like sees that migration as a security issue, and that's the same model they're trying to replicate in countries like Senegal and in West Africa and other places, in which they're telling them you need to bolster up your police forces, you need to your navy, you need to work on your judicial forces, and that's the approach you need to take.
Is it a topic that you're still reporting on now that you're back in Romania?
Not so much. No, I've kind of shifted a bit. I think there's also like disappointment and a frustration that no matter how forensic, no matter how well you can show something that's happening, um, it doesn't really go beyond a statement or some sort of outrage. Like, even if you show how public money is wasted or being used for a human rights violation, often um, it doesn't seem to matter in the end, because things have actually becoming much worse in terms of the types of things the EU has been funding, and in types of policies. There's a new pact on migration that's really restricting the ability of people to ask for asylum, um, and kind of to have to be mobile and move around. So uh, yeah, it's definitely a tough topic, and it seems like a lot of it has been normalized. More and more has been normalized, and people are desensitized, and they're like, well, what's new? What are we looking at now? They're like this, and this is what they are, and it seems like no one wants to change them. So in the end, what's the point?
And to go back to the two central figures in your story, Cheikh and Njouda, how are they doing now?
So after they got out from prison, they ended up back, like they went back to their communities, and uh, they have like started to reintegrate. They told me when we spoke, they uh, had a big kind of economic impact on their lives, because they had to sell some of their stuff while they were away. Their families had to kind of take over their work, um, but they've managed to kind of come back, and now they're slowly kind of starting to rebuild back their businesses and relation. I think they're back at also being involved within their communities and helping the community prevent these types of dangerous journeys, or at least kind of prevent the deaths and the risks from it.
That's where we'll leave it for today's episode. Thank you very much for this interesting conversation, Andrei, and I'll be back soon for another episode.
Thank you, Emma.
You've listened to the podcast of Follow the Money. Our watchdog journalism is funded by our members. Subscribe and support European investigative journalism.